Technology. Hi guys, welcome again. This is part 2 of the history of dessert plating and the culinary arts, because we have both going on a little bit and they both impact each other. So fast forward into, we were talking about the 1950s, Little Joe, a lot of local Italian restaurants. This, for example, whoops. This was my was my grandmother's ravioli pin. So she came over. They came over from Italy. A lot of Italians immigrated. Very very poor. They came over here and they worked. They moved up to the country because it was like the climate in Italy, right? It was very hot. So a lot of Italians, we had a big Italian immigration movement at that time, at the turn of the last century. Great grandmother, actually. So sorry. But you would roll this out, of course, and you also look at portion sizes. This was a ravioli. So there's a lot to talk about because even portion sizes have changed. But this would leave an imprint. Now, I've also used it for sweet ravioli, though. So now sweet ravioli kind of started becoming popular in the 1980s. So food trends started to change. We had chocolates. This was a local. It is a local chocolatier. You guys, I'm sure, are all very well. Maybe you're aware of it, having lived in San Francisco. But and Warren Buffett bought it, the big investor. But I like it because, for one thing, he stayed true to the roots. And the chocolate is no longer being actually processed at See's Candy. I believe there are only 3 manufacturers that are actually processing chocolate themselves these days. I mean, breaking it down. This is a whole different lecture we will do on chocolate. But I mean, taking the cacao bean and breaking it down and doing it themselves. Why? Because it's not cost effective. It's not cost effective, and these days you can buy a really good quality product, which is true of anything. The reason our jobs have been replaced to a great deal is because, you know, even at the Hilton, at the Westin, you can buy petit fours that are delicious, that nobody knows the difference. So we'll go through petit fours categories on another day, but your customer really doesn't know the difference. So I again encourage you guys just to learn everything you can, because I'd say coming out of this time, and even in this time, what's wanted and needed are people who are adaptable and who are just going to approach the job market like, I'm ready to learn, I will learn. And honestly, that's always the best way to approach it. It's sort of how I approached my own career. I started out as a pastry cook and chef, and then I got interested in it all. And I used to run the bistro class, fine dining. I love doing line cooking. It's only a strength to be able to do have lots of talents. And you guys are multi-talented. So just putting it out there. The 1950s we talked about already a little bit, but what was happening, as well as the beginning, I said, of the civil rights movement. Also what was happening was space exploration. So a lot of the recipes, Jell-O, it was the heyday for Jell-O because astronauts were taking it with them. And Jell-O is gelatin coming from animals. So vegans and vegetarians don't eat it. They would use a gelatin called agar, which is coming from seaweed. Um, so things like Jello mold rings, which I won't take the whole time to show you, but I really highly encourage you to look at it. I'm doing a brief overview, and perhaps I'll do some videos later of specific decades because it's fascinating. If you like your trade, then this should all be fascinating. This guy, this is who I would really like, and those of you who we had the opportunity to work together in the actual restaurant, you know that I have many or a few copies at least by this time because some disappeared of this book, Bo Freiberg. I highly recommend it. I bought some on Amazon. I think you for the class. I highly recommend it as a textbook for all of pastry. It's much more sort of specific than the textbook that is being used by Job Corps. It's classical pastry. So what started happening in the 80s, you had 80s and 90s. So you had a lot of plating was very specific. I remember doing this in the 90s, these kinds of things. So we use paper bags for our sauces. Saucing is its whole own art form. So these are all very sort of 90s plating. Using a good book as a reference like this doesn't mean that you have to keep duplicating things from the 90s. It means that you're learning a good foundation to explore using it in your own way and in contemporary times. But it's like learning music, I'm sure, or any of the arts, the fine arts, dance. You can have modern art, you can have jazz, but there's a nice fundamental principle in learning the basics. And so all of this. But in the 90s, for example, you see this is actually a Napoleon. What they started to do was deconstruction of plating. And so a traditional Napoleon is a very specific puff pastry dessert, layered dessert. And from sort of Carême and Escoffier's time, and it was named after Napoleon, who was the first general to include a culinary division in the army, and so that was a big deal. The French love food, so it's always said that's why. Before that, it was like officers, soldiers were scavengers, as in armies, and they would take food where they found it, from conquering, from invading, from whatever. Okay, but so Napoleon's army is the first army that is credited with putting in a cooking division where they're actually like carrying pots and pans with them to that extent and cooking for their own troops. All of this cake work, you guys, some of you have just transferred from baking, or you will. This is genoise, and people in pastry have just done baking, or they should be remembering what a genoise is. And these days, again, even in a hotel dessert, if you were to assemble it, you'll probably be buying in the cake strip. But what this is a piped chocolate and vanilla cake, and then it's cut into strips, long strips after it's baked, and it's lined in a mold and then filled with a mousse or a chocolate ganache or anything. So these are all plated desserts, and the amazing thing is that, again, you learn any of these, I see the same things over and over, and it's because I'm a pastry chef, I know. But this is a tuile. This is called a tuile, and it's a very thin paste that's baked. It's made of egg white, flour, sugar, and butter, generally. And then this is a tuile, so you see the same things over and over. This is a beautiful chocolate piece. We'll do chocolate, but it's the same technique that's used for a chocolate run out, and except that it's put onto a piece of acetate, which is a plastic, it's an adhesive that releases the chocolate after it's formed so that you have a beautiful shape to it.